They fined me for fishing, said it was against HOA policy, even though I'd been casting lines there for years. So I bought the whole lake. Every inch of shoreline, every drop of water. And the first thing I did? Banned every single HOA member from stepping foot near it. Now they can only look at it from a distance and remember what it felt like to be in control. Some people have family photos on mantles. Me? I have memories of mist rising off a still lake, a line cast gently into the water, and my granddad sitting beside me with a can of worms and a cooler full of stories. This lake wasn't just a patch of water. It was a ritual. It was peace. I've been fishing here since I was 8 years old. My dad taught me how to bait a hook. My granddad taught me how to sit still long enough for the fish to come to me. We didn't need expensive boats or fancy gear, just a rod, a quiet breeze, and a few hours away from the noise of the world. Back then, the lake was just part of life. It sat nestled between rolling patches of tree-lined property. A few cattle ranches, a horse farm, a couple of hunting cabins, and us. We were all unofficial stewards of the lake. It didn't belong to any one person. Technically, it was under private development management, but everyone knew and respected how things worked. If you lived nearby and didn't leave trash or make a mess, you fished. Simple as that. Every weekend, I'd walk down the old gravel trail, rod in hand, and cast out from the same narrow bend in the reeds. It was the kind of place where people waved from their porches and kids caught frogs barefoot. Sure, folks had their differences. We were rural, not perfect, but there was a quiet understanding out here. The lake brought us together. It was the one place that wasn't fenced in, paved over, or zoned. That's probably why I never expected a fight to start there. But I should have known that peace like that never lasts once paperwork and power-hungry people start circling the water. It started with a few homes, new builds, going up on the south side of the lake. They were clean, cookie-cutter two-stories with vinyl siding and gravel driveways. Probably cost $500,000 each. At first, I figured it was just city folks trying to find peace and space. Nothing wrong with that. I waved to the contractors. I even helped pull a stuck U-Haul out of the mud one rainy afternoon. Then the flyers started showing up in my mailbox. Welcome to Lake Cedar Heights. Followed by monthly HOA newsletter, and then first HOA meeting, all residents encouraged to attend. Only problem was I wasn't a resident. I wasn't in the HOA zone. My home sat well outside the official development boundary. My mailbox was barely on their delivery path. But the newsletters kept coming. At first, they were harmless. Reminders about trash pickup, lawn mowing courtesies, things like that. But the tone started to shift the day Karen was elected president. Now, I'd seen Karen a few times. Tall, thin, always holding a clipboard like it was a badge. The kind of person who called herself civic-minded, but treated authority like a full-contact sport. She showed up once when I was unloading a few bags of fishing tackle out of my truck and asked, "Which lot are you?" I told her I didn't live in the HOA, that I'd been fishing this lake since before the road to her house was even paved, that my folks used to let neighborhood kids fish off her property line when they didn't have docks of their own. She smiled, tight-lipped. Well, things are a little more structured now. Still, I didn't press it. I figured if she wanted to feel important, let her. The lake had always kept itself just fine without regulation. That worked for a while, until I noticed the new signs. Big ones with laminate. HOA member use only. Fishing permit required. Trespassing subject to fine. Permit? That word had never belonged on the shoreline. And they placed one of the signs right at the bend, my bend, where I'd fished for 20 years. At first, I ignored it. Thought maybe it was just posturing. A little performative pride from the HOA's new queen. But a week later, I found a folded piece of paper under my truck's windshield wiper. It was a violation notice, a fine, issued on behalf of the HOA of Lake Cedar Heights for unauthorized use of recreational water space. They fined me $75 for fishing on the same lake where I'd caught my first catfish, when my father's ashes were scattered just 3 summers earlier, where no one had ever needed a permit to breathe in peace. I was stunned, but more than that, I was angry. I walked the notice straight down to the HOA office, a converted garage off Karen's property. She met me outside with the same clipboard in hand. "Sir, if you're here to dispute. Let's save the formalities, I said. This lake doesn't belong to your HOA. You have no authority to fine me. She didn't blink. As per our environmental stewardship policy, HOA members must obtain a permit for recreational use. Non-members are subject to enforcement by local ordinances. There is no ordinance, I snapped. I checked. The lake's never been under your control. Well, the board disagrees, she said, smiling. And until we clarify things legally, I'm afraid the fine stands. I turned and walked away. I didn't shout, didn't rip the notice up, but in that moment, I made a decision. If they thought they could push me off this water, then I'd make sure they never touched it again. The fine should have been the end of it. Just a laughable overreach from a bored HOA president with too much ink in her printer. I figured I'd ignore it, go back to fishing, and maybe Karen would find a new hobby that didn't involve harassing people who didn't live under her thumb. I was wrong. 3 days after I tossed that violation notice in my junk drawer, I got a new letter. This one was folded neatly inside a stamped envelope, real official looking, with the HOA's logo printed on the corner. Inside was a much more aggressive message. Notice of continued violation. You have been observed fishing on Lake Cedar Heights property without an active HOA-issued recreational use permit. As of insert date, fishing, boating, or any recreational use of the lake requires annual authorization and a permit number. Failure to comply with HOA regulations may result in further fines, legal escalation, and community access restrictions. I actually laughed out loud. It read like something out of a bad legal drama. I almost expected a watermark on the paper and a fake gold seal at the bottom. Except this wasn't fiction. This was real, and it was escalating. I walked straight into town the next day and visited the county clerk's office. I wanted 2 things: the current zoning and land ownership map of the lake and surrounding land, confirmation on whether this HOA had any jurisdiction at all. The woman behind the counter was helpful. She printed me a series of documents showing what I already knew. The lake sat within a privately owned parcel, registered years ago to a company out of state. The shoreline was bordered by a patchwork of older family plots, including one corner that touched mine. And the HOA? They didn't own a single inch of it. They had no deeded rights, no easement, no formal agreement. Just proximity and presumptuousness. Still, Karen wasn't slowing down. That weekend, I returned to the dock and found a laminated notice zip-tied to one of the posts. Restricted access zone, subject to monitoring. Per HOA policy, all non-permitted activity on the lake may be recorded and referred to legal authorities. They had mounted a trail cam in the trees across the water. Unreal. They were filming the lake like it was Area 51. And treating lifelong residents like we were trespassers in our own town. I confronted Karen again. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I was done pretending her clipboard meant anything. I caught her pacing near the HOA bulletin board and walked straight up, holding the laminated sign in my hand. "You put this on my dock?" I asked. "As part of the HOA's safety initiative," she replied, not missing a beat. "We're documenting violations until we get cooperation." "Karen, you don't own the lake. You don't own the shoreline. You don't even own the dock." She gave me that smirk, the kind people wear when they know they've got backup, even if it's all smoke. According to our environmental partner survey, the HOA has established implied stewardship through maintenance and landscaping projects. The lake is part of the community green space. Implied stewardship? I repeated. "That's correct," she said. "Our dues cover perimeter care, waterline preservation, and trail upkeep. It is our responsibility to regulate how it's accessed." "You mean the trail you added last year without asking anyone?" "The community board approved it," she said flatly. "We are within our rights." I could feel my patience draining like a leaky canoe. This wasn't just overreach, this was delusion. And worse, it was organized delusion. They weren't just making up rules. They were acting like they'd inherited the lake from God himself. 2 days later, I got an email. Yes, an email. Apparently, the HOA had decided to streamline communications and started collecting emails from public records and newsletter lists. Subject line: important. Recreational access suspended pending legal review. Inside, It read like a decree from a kingdom I'd never sworn allegiance to. Due to ongoing disputes regarding unauthorized fishing and non-compliant activity at Lake Cedar Heights, all access to the lake is hereby suspended until further notice. This includes all docks, shoreline paths, and water-based activities. HOA enforcement volunteers may be monitoring the area to ensure compliance. We thank you for your cooperation in maintaining the safety and unity of our community. Why enforcem volunteer? Who were they kidding? These weren't lifeguards or rangers. These were nosy neighbors with binoculars and too much free time. I thought about ignoring it. Again, just letting it pass. But something about the phrase, pending legal review, stuck in my craw. Because it was clear now, Karen wasn't trying to maintain anything. She was trying to own it. Own the rules. Own the water. Own the silence that people like me had enjoyed long before her kind ever saw a zoning map. So I made a decision. If she wanted to talk legal review, I was going to show her what real ownership looked like. They want a legal review? They were about to get one. Just not the kind Karen expected. I wasn't bluffing, and I wasn't looking for revenge. But I was done playing defense. It was time to figure out exactly who this lake belonged to, legally, not emotionally. Because if the HOA had even a thread of legitimate authority, I needed to know before I made my next move. So I took a trip down to the county recorder's office, a place most HOA presidents probably hadn't stepped foot in since their property taxes were last due. I asked for everything on Lake Cedar and the surrounding parcels. Plat maps, property boundary records, title histories, transfer documents, and anything with a named owner or tax ID attached. What I found confirmed a suspicion that had been nagging at me since the first fine showed up in my mailbox. The lake was still privately owned, not by the HOA, not by the city, not by any public utility or cooperative trust. It was part of an old holding company registered to a real estate developer who had acquired the land decades ago, probably with hopes to build a golf course or resort community that never materialized. The kicker? That developer lived 3 states away, hadn't paid a personal visit to the property in at least 10 years. Their only connection now was a P.O. box, an annual tax payment, and a dusty LLC still holding title to a piece of water they probably forgot they owned. And the HOA? They had nothing. No deed, no easement, no usage agreement, no shared responsibility, not even an active lease. They were pretending. And for years, no one questioned it because no one else cared enough to check. But I did. That night, I did 2 things. I called a lawyer, explained the situation, and asked him how quickly we could make a private offer for the property. I looked up the LLC owner, found a phone number connected to a records agent in another state, and placed a call myself. It took 3 voicemails, 1 awkward secretary, and a 30-minute phone call with a man named Phil who sounded like he'd just come in from mowing his pasture. He said flatly, "You want to buy the lake?" "Sure. I haven't touched it in years." I made a formal offer through my attorney. Cash, clean title transfer, buyer covers all closing costs. I didn't even try to haggle. Why? Because this wasn't just a lake. It was leverage, and it was worth every penny. Within 11 days, the sale was completed. Just like that, I became the legal owner of the entire body of water the HOA had been so eager to regulate. The paperwork was filed at the county. The title was recorded, and a clean deed was issued in my name. I made copies. Lots of them. 1 went in my safe. 1 went to my lawyer. And 2 went directly into envelopes addressed to the HOA board. Karen Bennett, president of Pine Hollow HOA. Each envelope contained a copy of the recorded deed and a simple cover letter. To whom it may concern. Effective insert date. Full ownership of Lake Cedar and its associated shoreline has transferred to protagonist's name, as recorded in the county registry under parcel #XXXX. All unauthorized use of the lake, including fishing, boating, and trail access, is henceforth prohibited without written consent from the owner. All signage referring to HOA regulation of Lake Cedar must be removed within 10 business days to avoid legal action. Violations will be considered trespassing and prosecuted accordingly. No threats, no insults, just legal fact, wrapped in quiet, airtight authority. The response was fast. 3 days later, Karen showed up at my property, not storming, but stiff as a fence post. She stood on the public road, just outside my gate, and called out, "This is a misunderstanding." I stepped out onto the porch. "No, got in. It's the first thing you've ever misunderstood on paper." She didn't speak for a moment. Then she asked, "So you're really going to ban everyone from the lake? Even the families that live along the west shore?" I shrugged. "They didn't try to find me." "You did." She didn't reply, just stood there, probably thinking about how many meetings she had led, how many flyers she had printed, how many rules she had invented, all for a lake that had never been hers. That weekend, I posted new signage. Simple, professional, nothing dramatic. One by the boat ramp. Private lake. Entry by written permission only. One at the trail entrance. No trespassing, property under surveillance. And one, just for my own satisfaction, right where the HOA had once planted their laminated sign. Lake owner, my name, access, denied to HOA members until further notice. The calls started rolling in. Not angry ones, confused ones. Neighbors who had used the lake for years under the false belief it was community property started asking what happened. Some were surprised. Some were embarrassed. A few even apologized for not realizing what the HOA had been pulling. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in. I just said the same thing to everyone who called. If you were never part of the problem, you don't need to worry. But I'm not letting anyone use my property until the people who abused it are held accountable. The week after the deed became mine, I went to the local sign shop and paid for 6 aluminum placards. Black lettering, white background, reflective finish. They read, "Private lake, no HOA access. Violators will be prosecuted for trespassing." I had them mounted on treated wood posts, spaced evenly along the southern trail, the boat launch, and the HOA's prized community overlook. By Saturday, they were all up, legal, secure, and absolutely unavoidable. It was quiet for the first day. No calls, no emails. Just a thick silence humming under the surface, like the calm before a small-town storm. The next morning, I heard lawn chairs scraping. By noon, a small crowd of curious onlookers had gathered near the overlook, staring at the signs like they'd just seen the moon split in two. I stayed back and let the signs do the talking. No reason to rub it in. But the real show started when Karen got involved. By Monday, I got a glossy newsletter slipped under my gate. No postage, no envelope, just a quick print job from someone in damage control mode. It read, "Clarification on lake access for HOA residents. Dear residents, due to a recent misunderstanding regarding ownership boundaries, access to Lake Cedar is temporarily limited while our legal team resolves a paperwork discrepancy with the county. We believe this will be resolved swiftly. In the meantime, please refrain from lakefront use to avoid further complications." Paperwork discrepancy? There was no discrepancy, just embarrassment. The county records weren't in dispute. The legal deed was filed, certified, and time-stamped. The only thing in dispute was Karen's pride. But she couldn't admit that to the community she'd spent years micromanaging. So she tried to spin it. Tried to act like this was a minor mix-up, like I was some confused landowner holding up recreational fun for everyone else. It didn't work, because word had already gotten out. One of the HOA board members, a guy named Mike who I'd helped pull out of a ditch during a snowstorm last winter, called me the night after the signs went up. "Man, Karen's in full meltdown. Nobody knew the lake wasn't really ours." I just chuckled. "It never was." "I know that now," he said. "But she's scrambling to rewrite the history." "Let her," I replied. "Just make sure she knows what happens if someone ignores the signs." That weekend, a group of teenagers from the HOA brought a kayak down to the waterline, probably told by their parents it was fine. I didn't blame them, but I also didn't let it slide. They were halfway to the dock when they saw the private patrol truck I'd hired parked in the shade. A retired sheriff's deputy named Russ stepped out and waved calmly. Didn't raise his voice, just pointed to the signs. The kids left. No shouting, no drama, just the quiet understanding that something had changed. And that's how I wanted it. Not angry, not vengeful, just clear. The lake had new rules, and for once, they weren't written by someone holding a clipboard and a grudge. By the end of the month, I stopped getting newsletters altogether. I guess they figured I didn't need community updates anymore. The HOA forum lit up. People started asking questions publicly. How do we not know we didn't own the lake? Why were we paying dues labeled lake upkeep if the lake wasn't ours? Can we get refunds? Who signed off on using the lake in listing ads? Karen stopped answering. A few posts disappeared overnight. The HOA Facebook group quietly switched to private. Then came the in-person reactions. People who once crossed the street to avoid eye contact now waved. One guy brought over a peace offering, a six-pack and a sheepish, sorry we didn't look into it sooner. Even the real estate agent who'd sold most of the homes came by and admitted, I was just told to say the lake was part of the HOA. Never checked. The only one who didn't say anything? Karen. She disappeared from sight for weeks. No patrol walks. No emails. Not even a passive-aggressive note in anyone's mailbox. I didn't need her apology. I already had her correction, written in legal filings and confirmed by silence. By month's end, 3 households had petitioned the HOA for transparency. 2 board members resigned. A third demanded a financial audit of all past dues labeled lake maintenance. It wasn't just a policy shift, it was an identity crisis for the entire neighborhood. The lake had been their centerpiece, their selling point, their pride. Now, it was someone else's locked gate, and they had Karen to thank. It didn't happen with a bang, more like a long, collective exhale. A few weeks after the signs went up and the patrol truck settled into its weekend routine, a quiet shift began to ripple through the neighborhood. Karen was gone. Not literally. Her house still sat on the corner with its perfect hedges and ceramic wind chimes. But politically, she was done. She resigned from the HOA board during a closed-door meeting. No farewell email. No apology. Just a short note posted on the HOA bulletin board. Due to personal reasons, I will be stepping down from my leadership role effective immediately. No one clapped. But no one questioned it either. It was over. In the days that followed, I started to notice something strange, something kind of hopeful. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years began walking past the lake again. Not to fish or push boundaries, but to say hello. They waved. They slowed down. A few even stopped at the gate and asked, respectfully, if there was any way to work something out. No one demanded. No one assumed. Just quiet people who missed casting a line in the early morning light or watching their kids skip stones at the shore. I didn't forget what had happened, but I wasn't holding a grudge. So I set some boundaries and reopened limited access to a few of the families who had approached with respect and humility. They signed written agreements. They followed rules. They treated the space like what it always was, a gift, not an entitlement. And just like that, the lake started to feel like itself again. Not overrun, not policed, just peaceful. The funny thing is, I never wanted to own the lake to keep it from people. I wanted to own it so it could stay protected. So no one, not Karen, not the HOA, not a well-meaning but misguided committee, could ever pretend it was theirs to control again. By summer's end, the water was calm, the fish were biting, and the laughter you heard near the shoreline came without tension. No clipboards, no laminated signs, no nonsense. Just the way it used to be. If your HOA thinks they can fine you off the water you grew up on, remind them. Lakes can be bought, rules can be rewritten, and some fences go all the way around the shoreline. Because power isn't about titles or committees. It isn't about laminated policies or neighborhood newsletters. It's about deeds. And if you've got your name on one, you don't need to raise your voice. Just raise your eyebrows and point to the county seal. They thought they could push me off the water like I didn't belong. But I didn't just belong here. I was here before their houses were ever built. Before their bylaws, their permits, their pamphlets. They try to gatekeep peace. I built the gate, kept the key, and reminded them who really owned the view. So the next time someone threatens to rewrite your rights, don't argue. Just turn the page and buy the chapter they're standing on. Because out here, the only HOA that matters is holding on to authority, the legal kind,